critique and lessons learned. This symposium this morning in Istanbul time and other times around the world will be about the United Arab Emirates. We have 5 speakers, and they will be speaking about different topics. The first paper will be by Dr. Mr. Humaid Abdulla Alnuaimi under the title Struggle about the Identity or Conflict about the Identity. The second one about the Islamic movement, about the employment of the ulama or scholars in the popular work. And the third one will be about the Islamic movement and in the movement under the light of exclusion and marginalization. And the fourth paper will be about the state and the foreign affairs. And the last one will be by Ms. Walaa about the Islamic movements. The first one about the identities of the Islamic movements will be presented, as I mentioned, by Mr. Humaid Abdulla Alnuaimi. He is the head of the Gulf Center for Thinking. He is a media activist from the UAE. He has a graduate at university degrees, and he is interested in the political thought, Islamic thought, and the human rights. The second paper about the government policy about the employment of Islamic movements in popular mobilization by Mr. Ahmed Alshaiba Alnuaimi. He is also a writer and a media professional from the UAE. He is the head of the International Center for Development, and he is the head of the International Group for Combating Normalization. He worked previously as the head of the Cambridge Center for Teaching and Training in London, and he was also the head of the Arab Center for Orientalist Studies. He has a master's degree in psychology, and he has also a university degree from Beirut University, and he has a degree also from Northeastern University in Boston. In education, he writes in different papers, and he is an editor of a number of TV programs, and he was also the head of the Students' Union in the United Arab Emirates, and he has different books. The third paper, which is under the title or the paper of the government policy and marginalization and exclusion of Islamic movement, and it will be by Dr. Walaa Quisay, and he has an IT degree from North Carolina University, and he has a master's degree from Istanbul Shahir University, and he is interested in the case that is known as United Arab Emirates 94, and in the United Arab Emirates he was working in the internal education in Ajman, Emirates. Afterwards, we will have the presentation of Dr. Walaa. It will be about the state and the Islamic movement and a vision from outside. She has a PhD in sciences from Oxford University, where she has conducted her study about the Muslims in the West with the focus how they were moving between the traditional approach and the modern approach and politics. She is a researcher in Birmingham University and Istanbul Shahir University after her graduation, and before her graduation, she taught in the Islamic and religious studies and social studies, and now she is writing a book about the topic that she has acquired her PhD degree. Her research focus on the Islamic movements, Islam and the traditional Islamic currents and modern currents in the Islamic movements. Then the comment will be by Altikriti, or the last one will be about Altikriti. He is originally from Iraq, and it will be about the he has been living in the in the USA for over half a century, and he was working. He established a think tank that focus on the conflict of civilizations, and he tries to find channels of understanding between the West and the Islamic world. He was the head of the Islamic Association in the UK in 2004 and 2018, and he has an a PhD from Westminster University in London in political sciences, where he has his thesis about the Islamic movements and how they are seen by the West after or in the post 9/11 events. And he is the professor at a number of universities in the UK. After these presentations, we will have a comment by Mr. Ahmed Maulana. And he is an engineer in his study, but he is a researcher and a master's student in Sabah ad-Din Zaim University. He has written a number of books, like, for example, The Security Mentality in Dealing with Islamic Movements, and a study in the corridors of the internal security and the experience of the NATO, and a critique of their approach. And he also published a study we published here in the center about the roots of the UAE military activity. And he also has a number of studies about Israel and and a study about the military or the armed forces in the United Arab Emirates. Welcome all in this good experience that is relatively new, but we have a lot of experience and lessons that we can learn from this experience. We will start first with Mr. Humaid about the conflict around identity. The floor is yours, Mr. Humaid. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. In the name of God, and the peace be upon you, and all the blessings and the praise be to God and to his messenger Muhammad. First, I would like to thank you for this opportunity. I believe the title that I have given to this paper, this is the main thing that any person needs to learn about the project before learning about the identity. So there is a close correlation in the identity, in the tradition, not only in the UAE but in the entire region. The project of the United Arab Emirates is linked closely to the region and the international sphere, and it is very obvious. So anybody who understand, watch the United Arab Emirates and its movements in the region and in the world, they can see that the objective is to have a weight in the region and in the international field, to understand all the projects that the United Arab Emirates is participating in. The United Arab Emirates have gone beyond the religious and cultural tradition, and the leaders or the decision makers think that they are able to make a new weight for the UAE, so they have the right to have different international roles. Starting from this point, we can understand a basic thing: why the decision makers in the UAE need to change different identities, whether internally or at the level of the region, because they are correlated completely with the projects that are launched by the decision makers, and it is related to its influence or to their influence in the region and in the world. So the identity revision was a basic thing, and to review the terms of reference of the United Arab Emirates in order to implement these projects. However, before we start on this, we need to go back to understand how the UAE has started. So to understand what is the UAE when it started as a state, and when it has put its foot in the region, and how it was dealing in the region. And here I will need to read some text in order to focus on this issue. The first issue in Article 6, the Constitution of UAE says that unity of the Arab Emirates is part of the Arab world. It is related to it with religion, culture, language, and the common origin. So we see here the Islamic identity that they started from, and the Arab nationalist identity that defines the United Arab Emirates in its region. Then it says it is part of the Arab world. So all of the considerations that need to be taken by the decision makers during the drafting of the constitution, they were taking these identities in the identity in their consideration. Then they repeat that, or they recognize in the text that the Islamic Sharia is the main source of legislation and in creating all the projects. Of course, I am mentioning this because after a while, I'm going to speak how this identity changed from the beginning of the UAE. Then it says that the foreign policy of the UAE aims at supporting the causes of the Arab and Muslim world, which means that the interests of the Muslim world and the Arab world will be supported by the UAE because the United Arab Emirates is part of this fabric. And in the inauguration speech, Sheikh Zayed, may he rest in peace, said, and here we are speaking about the strategic framework of the country. He says that the interest of our country as part of the Arab world. So here he linked the interest of the people of the Arab Emirates and as part of the Arab world, based on that all the interests are mutual in this region. And he speaks also that we will have the strongest relations with our brothers in the Gulf. And then the national interest of our Arab world in unity and supporting the Arab causes, first and foremost, the Palestinian cause. That was the beginning or the pillars of the United Arab Emirates, and everything that came after were built on this strategic view. All the books, the lectures, the activities uh, that happened later, it was a relapse from those pillars that we started that took into consideration the identity, the religious and cultural identity. That's how we started. That was the beginning and the foundations of the state. Afterwards, some things changed, some policies were shifted, and we can say that we have statements that show we can call the coup against those traditions internally and externally. For example, there is Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed. He was speaking with the National Security Council advisor of the USA. He said that we don't want the democracy that brings us similar people who are similar to those Islamists. And he said that we are in a challenge and we need to find a way to eliminate them once and for all so they cannot come again. And we are changing the curricula that were developed by the Muslim Brotherhood. Similar to that, Yusuf Al-Utaiba says that his country prefers secularism in governance, and it is implementing the democracy of the West. And this was in an interview with the Atlantic Journal. He says that the United Arab Emirates prefers the Western separation of religion from the state. We learned that from you, but we have our own democracy that we are implementing. In another interview, he says, if you ask the UAE, KSA, Jordan, and Bahrain what a Middle East that we want in the coming 10 years, we would say that we need or we want a completely different Middle East from that Qatar wants. We want a more secular Middle East, stable and flourishing, and the road to future requires the separation of the state from the religion, and that's what we are doing in the UAE. Rand think tank says now, I am mentioning that to see why we are seeing this radical change in the UAE. RAND, the think tank that is affiliated with the US Air Force, building moderate Muslim networks in order to deal with the Muslims and not with the Islamists. So the issue is not about changing the mentality of the Islamists, but to change the mentality in the entire Muslim world. So this moderate current is the one that says that it is fine not to implement the Islamic Sharia. So to take that as a terms of reference, and we want the religious current to be on the forefront. What do they mean by the religious current? It is the people who have practiced the rituals, and that's it. So only people who go to the mosque, pray in the mosque, and that is their relation with religion. So, and we encourage the Sufi religious current, which is a current that has no problem to pray in the graveyards, for example, or in cemeteries. So this is very important to understand what is required or for this region. and and they also say that they want to deal with the liberal secular people and the Muslims that don't have a problem with the democracy or don't see there is contradiction between democracy and Islam. All of that leads to 4 points. First, depending on secularism as the terms of reference for the state. Number two, enmity with democracy that will for sure brings Islamists. And the fourth point is to establish or to develop curricula that brings good people, so to speak, and not radical ones. So this is this was the big the launch of this new tradition that is pragmatic and that they want to that is infringing on the identity of the people. So they think or the decision makers depend on changing the identity of the United Arab Emirates and the region in order to create societies that believe that the interests that the ruler wants, which calls sometimes the pragmatism or any other norm, and not to have any mental or ideology that will prevent people from objecting to anything that the ruler does. And secularism in the UAE is different from the only separating religion and the state. It goes beyond that, and they are wanting to create a new religion that combines politics and religion. So, taking all of these contexts in consideration, who are the enemies right now for the United Arab Emirates, and why the Islam as a terms of reference and an identity has a problem with the decision maker in the UAE. The first problem or the first problem is Islam in itself. Why? Because Islam gives a sacredness for the text, for the Quran, and then to the Sunnah, a high value of the Sunnah. So for the constitution in the UAE that says that the Islam is the terms of reference and the Islamic Sharia is the terms of reference, so they cannot do a lot of things. That's why they need to change the terms of reference to make it the interest and the higher interest as the main terms of reference, which will allow those projects to be implemented and the societies accept that. The second enemy or the second problem, if we can say so, the Islamists who believe that politics is part of the religion. We can see in the context that I have mentioned, they want to have a certain kind of Islam, Islam that is away from governance, and Islam that doesn't have any sacredness, and the sacred things are only those that the ruler believe are sacred. So that is the kind of Muslims that they want, and that's why we see the enmity and the extremism of enmity for the Muslims and the Islamists. Um, and to at the end, they are we are seeing different approaches that want to achieve this ideology. The third point is or the third enemy is the societies that are committed to this terms of reference. Mohammed bin Zayed said before that if there are elections, the Muslim Brotherhood will win in this region. So they want to change the societies in order not to support the Muslims or the Islamic projects and the to prevent Islam that or people who want Islam to be the terms of reference. So they need to change the mentality of the societies in order to do that. That's why they should defame the Islamists and change the societies or take the support from society toward these things. Now, I'm going to speak about the internal things. All of that was an introduction to understand the mentality that we have in the heads of the decision makers. These points, all of these points, lead to what we have seen in WikiLeaks leaks, or what is mentioned in the RAND think tank, that if there is if the United Arab Emirates started with these projects, they will be supported by the West, and that's why, and that's what he mentioned to the Westerners, that we have learned that from you, and we are the best allies for you. I believe my colleagues are going to speak about some of these points in detail later. The other point is that we need to see how the UAE worked in their foreign policies. They started with the center Hidayah, and the only enemy for this center are the Islamists in Europe. Then in 2012, there was another center, and then Sawab Center in 2015. Then the International Institute for Tolerance in 2017. And then in 2018, the Center for Combating Extremism. Then it combated the institutionalization of Muslims in the West. So they wanted to make the institutions in the West or consider all of them as terrorist groups in order to be targeted, and encouraging the West to fight the institutionalization of this Islamic mentality, including the institutions that are working in Europe. And that's what mentioned by the foreign minister Abdullah bin Zayed when he was addressing the West, that terrorism is in the West, because towards the end, as we say, they are growing within your place, because you are allowing those terrorists to establish institutions and to work from your territories. So to understand all of that, of course, the decision maker requires to have a new identity that can correlate with the religion in a certain level and with other functions in order to be employed and to support the decision maker to start with projects, whether inside the United Arab Emirates or outside. And here I'm not going to get into details. I will just mention some broad headlines, and Dr. Alnuaimi is going to mention some of the details. So the authority wants to have a religion that serves its interests. So they encouraged Sufism, and Sufism is about spiritual things and has nothing to do with politics or the lives. And we have seen it from the paper that is published by Rand, is that they want to have or to support Sufism. So the United Arab Emirates captured that. They supported Sufism and supported that kind of mentality to surface in order to bring the people away or isolated from the terms of reference, the Islamic terms of reference in dealing with the reality, and to be interested in spiritual things. The second thing they is the supporting the Jami school of thought, which gives holiness to the ruler, and that they should be uh, 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 and all of the orders should be obeyed regardless of anything. And then we have seen after that the Abrahamic religion that they established. So now we have those three religions. All of these things feed into reprogramming the mentality and the religious understanding of the people within the United Arab Emirates in order to be in line with the political ambitions and the projects that they are implementing on the ground. Then they also provided opportunity to have skepticism and doubts. So the platforms were open in the media outlets for Wasim Youssef, for example, who questions Al-Bukhari, and Ahmed, and another one who was also questioning all the origins of the Sharia. And then there was the Council of the Muslim Scholars to be an alternative of the International Council for Scholars. And now, and they started to combat Wahhabism that everybody is fighting now. And Mohammed bin Zayed stated earlier that he is supporting Mohammed bin Salman to eliminate the extremist Islam in Saudi Arabia as well. After that, they started to also show tolerance with all religions. We need to remember here that in the UAE, all religions are practicing their rituals freely, apart from Islam. So they have their temples, they can practice all of their rituals, they can have all of their religious festives. They don't have any questions who is going to speak and what they are going to say. But at the level of mosques, there is complete internal monitoring to what is being said. Of course, the Friday sermons and the speeches all are unified. They come up from the Awqaf ministry, and there is complete monitoring of what is going to be said to the Muslims. But that doesn't apply to any other religion or any other sect. Then there was a slogan that was issued, which is tolerance, that you can do anything with that. And we have a position which is the Ministry of Tolerance, and then the Ministry of Tolerance and Coexistence, and then the National Program of Tolerance. And this allows people to be without any religious terms of reference when they deal with others. And this led to what was called the first multi-faith prayer. And we reached that level of tolerance in order. Now, all of that led to the following. Now, here we are talking about what is related to the Muslim identity. Now, we need to found other identities. So those identities can become the terms of reference with which the decision maker in UAE can go faster in their projects. So we started to see, or they created three new identities. The first one, the Sheikhhood or the Mashiachiyya identity. So the good citizen now in United Arab Emirates are those who obey or follow the ruler. So this is the new identification or definition of the good citizen. Even in so many times, the problems that we see in United Arab Emirates, the critique is directed to the governments and not the rulers or the ruling family. So the problems are for the government and the ministers and the sheikhs and the princes, the ruling family. They don't have any problems their performance, and that's what leads to the good citizen, the good citizens who follows the ruling family. And the ruling family is always depicted as they are the heroes and they are the good people. So all other identities were overlooked. So we don't have any weight for any of the tribes or the sheikhs or the tribal leaders in any decision makers. The role of the tribes became only in two issues. The first one is about the celebrations in the national day. So this is the only role. The tribe, they come, and a representative or a spokesperson of the tribe comes to speak and to show the pledge allegiance for the ruling family in the country. The second thing for the tribes, if they are required in some events to support the government in the face of the opposition, as the issue of the five detainees, which is a well-known case. And those five detained people were only activists on the internet, and they were calling for political reforms. And they were put in a prison. All of the tribes were collected in order to support the action of the government. So the tribes were used for that. Afterwards, or other than that, there is no role for the tribes to do anything in that is related to the life of the Emiratis. The third identity is to have a country identity without any relation or any belonging to the Ummah. The belonging to the UAE is the only terms of reference and the only identity that you need. That's what they are teaching the people. Why? Because we have a lot of issues that are related to the reality outside the UAE. So we don't want this belonging. For example, now we are working on normalization. So in order to implement normalization with the Israel, the people should be disengaged or unlinked with the Arab Ummah or the Muslim Ummah, and the state will be the replacement of all other identities or all other belonging and they created other issues. We can call, for example, this dichotomy, which is the pragmatic interests or the political interests makes us interested in certain issues or certain values. So, for example, if we have a political interest, so we support a certain country. If we have any political difference with that country might turn into an enemy, just like what happened in the Gulf crisis with Qatar or when any other countries. For example, Turkey was our friendly country, then it became an enemy, then it is a friendly state again. So we don't have any independence in any projects or any selection of the issues that are related to the Muslim and Arab Ummah. Uh, they are put in frameworks, political frameworks, and these frameworks become the source of selecting what countries to support or what projects to support, and the only terms of reference became what is seen by the ruler right. Mr. Humaid, you have 3 minutes left. The third identity is the global identity that is competing with the local identity. Mohammed bin Rashid, the ruler of Dubai, the prime minister, says we launched the global United Arab Emirates, and we are collect and a lot of creative people around the world, they selected the United Arab Emirates, the global United Arab Emirates. So now we are at the level that we are changing the name of the state, and that's what is needed, to have a state that accommodates all people with their different backgrounds and cultures, and that we are going to create a territory on the ground that supports that. In order to have these things appropriate on the ground, which led to the global UAE, there was a change in some of the laws and even secularizing the body in order to get into this global identity and having some issues that are that contradict with the Islamic terms of reference, and the Islamic terms of reference, of course, became marginalized. For example, um, having roommates from different sexes without marriage, it became common in the United Arab Emirates. Uh, and there are a lot of places that wine and alcohol beverages are drunk. And now Ras Al Khaimah is following suit, and it is contracting with an international company in Las Vegas to produce or to create a international gambling casino. And even for the holiday, we made Friday as half a day, and then we made Saturday and Sunday as the weekend in the United Arab Emirates, and the people in the United Arab Emirates objected to that. These issues that I mentioned, and they are only examples. They are not an exhaustive. This is not an exhaustive list, but these are changes on the ground that will lead to the change of the identity, to have a global identity and not only a local identity within the state of UAE, without having any problem to issue any law. And imagine that all of these laws are being issued and the people cannot say anything, because if any person or any citizen says something that is not accepted by the ruler, they will be imprisoned up to 10 years. The final point in 1 minute: all of this in order to have the region, or to change the region and to change the country. The Abrahamic Accords was signed. The goal is to is a coup against the cause that brings all Arabs together. So we are going into normalization, and the normalization that the UAE have shown hasn't been seen anywhere with other countries. So we have disengaged ourselves with the main cause that everybody agrees on. But the UAE have done that in order to prove that it is serious and that the government of the UAE is serious about going through that project till the end. And there is a support of a blue Middle East, and that's what Netanyahu said. And what is the meaning of a blue Middle East? This is the color of the flag of the Zionist regime, and it seems that there is a new Middle East that is being formed, and this was coinciding with the normalization of the UAE with the Zionists. And that leads to social normalization, and that we are going to change the religious, social, and cultural discourse in order to be in line with the normalization with the Zionists. One final remark: the project in the UAE is a project, unfortunately, that is changing a lot of our terms of reference. It is a project that has a problem with the Islamic terms of reference, with the Islamic identity and everything that is related to it, because this identity stops and hinders these projects and all of these objectives that the UAE wants to achieve and wants to change the identity and the nature of our society, because the rulers in UAE thinks that they will have more weight and more influence in the world if they do so. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Humaid Alnuaimi, for your presentation. Mr. Humaid started with speaking about the project of the state, and he said that it is closely linked with the objective of the control, the internal control, and the objective of the state to have regional influence and international acceptance to implement an international or global agenda. He said that the decision makers in the UAE are looking for a road that goes beyond the state or the boundaries of the country to compete with the superpowers. In order to do that, there was an targeting of what hinders these ambitions, and that's why they targeted the identity and the terms of reference, and that's why the decision maker found that it is necessary to find supportive identities to support the objectives of the government by changing the identity. He said that in the beginning or the establishment of the state, when the UAE was founded in the 70s, in the constitution and the literature, it considered itself part of the Arab nation and the Gulf, and supportive of the Palestinian cause as the central cause for the Muslim Ummah and the Arab nation, and that the Islamic Sharia is the terms of reference for the legislation. That's how the state was founded. But what happened later was a coup against this identity, and he mentioned that or he gave some examples about that. For example, in WikiLeaks documents, it was mentioned that Mohammed bin Zayed told George Bush at the time, or Francis Towson, he said that the winning of Hamas in the elections should be a lesson for the West about the democracy. And he said that I am sure that if we have elections in Dubai tomorrow, the Muslim Brotherhood are going to win. We don't want democracy that brings those people, and that we are in a war against those people, and we are in a challenge to eliminate those people once and for all. And we are changing the curricula that were developed by the Muslim Brotherhoods. And similar to that, Al-Utaiba, Yusuf Al-Utaiba, the ambassador to Washington, said that his country prefers secularism in governance, and they want to have secularism similar to the West. And in an interview with the Atlantic, he said that we prefer the Western democracy, and we have learned secularism, and we have learned that from you. Then he mentioned the plan that was put by RAND think tank in a report or in the book that was building modern Muslim networks about dealing with the Muslims and not only Islamists. This report said that the meaning of moderate is the current that believes that it is fine not to implement the Islamic Sharia, and that they believe in two Muslim currents only, and that was followed by the United Arab Emirates in their definition. The first one is the traditional the traditional Muslims, people who pray in the mosque and they don't have any other interest in politics or in the society. And the other one is the Sufi current, or which is accepts praying in the cemeteries. And the reports gave several examples of those who are called the moderate, which are the secular liberals who don't believe in religion in the country, and the Muslims who have no problem or don't see any contradiction between democracy and the Islamic values. So secularism was the solid territory or solid ground that those projects started or stood on, which is eliminating the terms of reference. And if secularism is the separation of state from religion, the secularism of this state, the UAE, was separating the state from religion and formulating a religion that serves the politics. So Islam will not be the terms of reference of the society in this plan, but afterwards it became the separation or the dismantling the identity. Then the lecturer asked who are the enemies of this project, and why the Islamic religion is a problem for the decision maker in the UAE. He mentioned the three things. He said the first one is a problem with Islam itself, because Islam gives the terms of reference and holiness to the sacred Quran that is not appropriate with the decision makers who are looking for or pursuing their interest without any constraints. The second enemy are people or Muslims who believe in this terms of reference and who believe that politics is part of the religion, and the government considers that they are the worst enemies under the banner of combating political Islam. And the third enemy are the societies that believe in these terms of reference because they will not agree with any practices that are against their identity. Then he said, to achieve that, the Islamic movements and their figures were targeted internally. The Muslim figures were targeted, and in the West, there are institutions that were established. He mentioned 5 centers. Most of them are in the United Arab Emirates and in other places. Then he said that part of the creation of an identity and a terms of reference for the society was the religion that serves the authority, and it was in supporting Sufism, which is a spiritual practice that has nothing to do with the day-to-day life and the authority of the people. And the second one was the Jami school of thought, which pays obedience to the ruler and call any objector or any opposition as a betrayal. And then establishing a third religion, which is the Abrahamic religion. And he said that part of that problem was the questioning the principles of religion, and he gave platforms, or they gave platforms for people who are skeptic of the religion, and they question the religion, and he gave several examples on that. In addition to that, establishing councils or institutions, like for example the institution of wise men of the religion, to be an alternative of the international ulama association, Muslim ulama association. He also said that part of that in the changing the identity, allowing all other religions to practice their rituals, but not the Muslims, but because the rituals of Muslims are under a close monitoring in society, but other religions are not. The other point that he talked about, the identity and how it creates an common culture. There was a need to change that identity in order to create a new terms of reference, and he spoke about the 3 terms of reference. The first one, the sheikhhood identity, instead of or to replace the religion as terms of reference. And the second one was the country identity, in order to have to link the people with their identity within the boundaries of their country. And the third one, the global identity that is competing with the local identity, as the ruler of Dubai said within an initiative that he launched under the name the Global UAE. And this is and this is what is the nature and what is the language of this country or this global country. He said that the ideas that support such identity, such a new identity that takes new terms of reference, is in the realm of uh, obeying rulers, tolerance with the West in attacking the Muslim institutions and the Muslims as they are extremists, and having and depicts the UAE as a global power. This this attempt is to, or there are examples that to prove that, for example, the uh, allowing the alcoholic beverages, for example, having casinos built, and changing the Friday from a holiday to, or a weekend to a working day, and allowing different sexes to live as roommates without marriages, and then the normalization with the Zionist people and the change of embassies, and this represents a coup against the collective cause of the Arabs, and that there is support to create a Middle East under the hegemony of Israel, as was stated by the UAE foreign minister, and that there is a promise to change the curricula and the religious and cultural discourse in a way that will be in line with this period. In conclusion, that the project in the UAE is changing the terms of reference, and this is a problem because it contradicts with the Islamic terms of reference, and it seems that the UAE is seen to be a leverage for this project. Thank you very much, Mr. Humaid. Now, in the second presentation for Mr. Ahmed Alnuaimi, about the employment of ulama and the scholars in politics by the rulers of the UAE. The floor is yours.
لو تعمل mute unmute.
Could you please unmute your microphone? Can you hear me now? Yes, go ahead, please. In the name of God, the merciful, the compassionate, praise be to God, and peace and blessings be upon Prophet Muhammad and his companions. Greetings to all. Good morning and good afternoon, according to your different time zones. Thank you, Dr. Sami, for this invitation. I would like, first of all, to thank the Center for Islam and Global Affairs at the Sabahattin Zaim University in Istanbul for hosting this symposium and inviting me to take part in it. And I would like to welcome and greet all of your speakers. The topic I am going to talk about today is about the Islamic movement in the UAE, with the use and exploitation of scholars and ulama by the government. Undoubtedly, when we talk about the Islamic movement, we must start with a sort of a definition or a clarification that it was one of the largest Islamic movements, which is the Dawah and Reform in the UAE, which was a moderate movement and was born from the society itself. And over the past decade, it has been branded as being a representative of the Muslim Brotherhood. It was branded by the government, of course, but actually it is a public community-based movement which agrees probably with the Muslim Brotherhood and other Muslim or Islamic moderate movements. But at the end of the day, it was a community-based Emirati movement, and it's none of the accusations made against it have been proven. But at the end, it was proven that it is a movement that is keen on preserving its homeland and that it belongs to that homeland. Nonetheless, it has been targeted and received a number of blows over the past decade. But to start with, if we are to start to understand the situation in the United Arab Emirates from the religious point of view, before we move to the point of exploitation of Islamic scholars and the public support by the government. I believe Humaid Alnuaimi has given me an introduction in explaining the relation between religion and the constitution and the state since the beginning of the establishment of the UAE in 1971 as it was a clear foundation for the state of the UAE, as the people of the UAE were are a Muslim nation, a Muslim people with no other religions over the past decades. No other religion predominated in the UAE, although it was open to all, not to offer citizenship, but it's open for people who can be residents or can be visitors or tourists. But the Article 7 of the Constitution said that religion, the religion of this United Arab Emirates was Islam, and it was the source of legislation, and its language was Arabic. This actually would restrict the ability of the government from predominating. So religion was giving predominance. It was the leader of the situation in Emirates, as the laws and the constitution were based on Islam. The history of the UAE is full of examples of the presence of clear religious terms of reference and the spread of Islamic scholars in each emirate. For example, Sheikh Ahmed Abdulaziz Al-Mubarak and Sheikh Abdul Karim Al-Bakri in Ajman and Abdullah Al-Mahmoud in Al-Fujairah. They were renowned and influential figures, and they were not subject to the authority of the state, but they issued fatwas and religious opinions freely. This continued until the changes in the region started, which means that religion was an important part of the identity and orientation of the state. However, over the past decade of the past century, in the 90s, that is, we had new orientations because of regional developments, including the Iraqi invasion of Kuwait, which created a problem with Islamic movements, and another incident, which is the attempted assassination of Hosni Mubarak in Egypt. Those incidents caused a lot of changes, and of course, at the turn of the century, the 9/11 caused a lot of such changes as well. I will come back to those changes and that stage of time where during this time, we witnessed a new orientation in policies and the change of figures in the leadership with the movement towards Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed, who was the crown prince at the time. The new orientation of the state that was started to be introduced, it was clear that religion would be used rather than so it would be used in the service of the state rather than the state being in the service of religion. As for the popular work, it wasn't organized before the unification of the Emirates. We started to witness the rise of civil society, associations, societies, and but we didn't have syndicates or worker unions. because also we didn't have political parties, but we had the presence of this community-based work through civil society, and it was so significant. And of course, the community, which is Arab and Muslim by nature, used the space available in through civil society activity that they could, through that, offer their work from an Islamic point of view and based on Islamic values. But the state, it was not to the liking of the state, as we said, with its new orientation to control ideology in the region, and its orientation was different and it wanted to co-opt this civil society and to control it, to put it in its service rather than the other way around. The strategies it used for that purpose, first of all, was distortion and deformation, which I will elaborate upon a bit later. The second is control or co-option and or absenting, so to control the Sharia Islamic scholars as well as the civil society. The third strategy was to replace and fill the gap by replacing those actors. I believe Mr. Humaid has mentioned some instances, but I will give other examples and details as well. Here I have to point out that the Emirati government did not change its strategies and policies based on any threat. There wasn't anything specific that happened or that the Islamic movement did that constituted a threat to the government or that constituted a threat to the stability of the state. Actually, the Islamic movement was in good communication with the state, and at some point we had ministers from the Islamic movement within the government, and they did not have any, and the movement was not known for any malpractices or violence or anything. But this change of attitude was because of the change in the mission of the state. The new mission of the state was not the service of the people, and this change was made by the decision makers away from the Emirati people, because the Emirati people were regarded as insignificant and had no representative whatsoever. But the Islamic movement issued the March petition, which included a number of figures from the Islamic movement, upon which the movement was accused of, although this petition was not issued by the movement by itself, but by different categories, although this petition, but it was only blamed on the Islamic movement, although it only included legitimate demands. In this paper, I will be describing the methodology used by the Emirati government to co-opt and use these scholars and the public action for its favor, and I hope I'll be successful in my endeavor. Those strategies which I have mentioned, I will elaborate on in this paper. If the observer of governmental action over the past period would notice that dealing with the Islamic movement and addressing the public action did not change because of a specific incident or change of affairs, but the change was gradual and incremental by it started with some exclusion from high-profile offices or employment, and reaching up to detention and imprisonment, causing many to choose exile because of those practices within the Emirates. How did those strategies start and how were they effected? And I have to point out that those strategies, they worked together rather than successively. The first strategy was the strategy of deformation and distortion, and this strategy is considered one of the main strategies used by the state, which we can see or recognize if you see all the tyrants and autocrats. They always work on the demonization of the other or of their opponents. And maybe the Machiavellian approach used in the United States was the same used by the Emirates. And one of the most important examples, there are many, of course, of the examples, but in terms of the main incidents, this March petition, which demanded parliamentary voting and elections for the Emirati people and for the parliament to be given broad powers. The deformation and defamation was targeted many of those who signed this petition, and some were pressured to take a step back and even issue statements saying that it was externally incited. So there was defamation and intimidation of the people from those such petition and such demands. And then there were a number of programs aiming to reach to the public and the masses, and they used the social media as it was newly introduced and very much widespread. So they the security apparatus hired much manpower only for this work, which is working on the defamation of religious people and religiously committed people and activists. So every activist would have a group of people and followers who would issue curse words and defamation. No post would go unnoticed and without comments and defamation. Civil society action and public action was not away from that defamation, because that defamation reached actually the such associations like the Human Rights Association and public goods associations, which included figures and people who were reformists from the Islamic movement. They were defamed and their work was suspended. And what was shocking was when they referred to the judiciary was still a bit independent, so they found no grounds or no evidence for the embezzlement with which the group was accused. But nonetheless, the state dissolved their board of administration and replaced their board of directors with people from its side. So this is the strategy they use. They defame and deform, and then they use the other strategies as well. The second strategy was the co-option, control, and absenting, which I mentioned, which is controlling those institutions. And it went hand in hand with the defamation and deformation when the government used legal and illegal tools for that purpose in order to prevent the actions at the level of the public and at the level of society. In 2002 and 2003, they excluded a large number of teachers from an Islamic movement background, from working as teachers or even in administrative posts within the Ministry of Education. In 2004, again, they perpetrated what I would call an atrocity in the against the activists from the Islamic movement, particularly those who were preachers in Jum'ah or Friday sermons, although they were doing it voluntarily, but they were prevented from continuing their work. So this policy they used everywhere, even on the media, and I'm trying to remember what happened. At one point, I was on a governmental TV or a channel. I was hosted on that channel. The time of the program was supposed to be a whole hour, but within 10 minutes, the presenter was confused and he started to conclude the program, and I had only been asked one or two questions, and I realized that something was wrong, and then he apologized and he told me that he received orders to suspend or stop this program, and it was this strategy that they would use in order to silence and absent those voices from the public sphere. Even those who would offer consultations or training courses, they would be summoned and they would sign what they call a security statement. Even if you have a lecture or a training session, you will have to fill out that security form and wait for security clearance, and you don't always get that security clearance, and very often they wouldn't actually respond in order not to fall into a predicament if they take action afterwards. So it was very much intimidating. We had the Reform Association in Dubai, and in Ras Al Khaimah and Al Fujairah and Al Irshad in Ajman. All of those associations were confiscated and taken over and dissolved. They dissolved their board of directors with totally illegal measures. And it was very clear that they wanted to absent those voices from the public sphere. And as I mentioned, this included civil societies such as the Teachers Association, Human Rights Association, and instead of the original directors, we had people from the governments, many of whom were security officers, actually, who took over those associations. The third strategy was replacement. And we could say that this strategy was pivotal in this process, and it constituted the actual control of religion and public work, so they become total servants in the service of the government and the state. So all the policies adopted by the state would be served by the religion and by public work. And the government was aware that there would be a gap when you exclude Islamists, when you take over those associations. Of course, we're talking about this exclusion that started with exclusion, but at the end of the day, it ended with arrests and imprisonments and pressing charges and sentences up to 10 years many of the leaders and figures of the Islamic movement have been exiled as well. So this gap had to be bridged, and that was through replacement, which was hinted upon by Mr. Humaid. But I am going to make a further clarification. This strategy was to fill this gap with people who would be suitable for the new form and the new tendency of the state. This replacement of the cadres, you would find some schools almost being as though they are in foreign country. You will find no local personnel, not even Arabs, and you would find that those schools have become totally foreign. This is a replacement not only of the Islamic movement, but even of local citizens, so that we have no trace of the original identity, and you would make that replacement. And this has also become part of the replacement in universities, as well as, of course, the lion's share was the replacement of scholars and dawah scholars. For example, with the advent of someone like Muhammad Shahrur, who deformed religion and played a role in absenting the idea from public awareness in order to shed doubt upon religion, so much so that religion has become subject also to speculations through drama, such as the depiction of the character of Al-Hallaj, who is a controversial figure. And was the Emirati government, with this replacement, wanting to convince the people with those characters? I don't believe so. What they wanted was to shake the ground and shed doubt for the people, so they are able to replace religion as a term of reference and as a solid foundation for the Emirati identity to become subservient to its own will. And of course, there were many governmental organizations or institutions that took a part in this, and they focused on public action and civil society. This was at the level of people as well as institutions along the same lines. For example, when we say at the level of public action institutions, we had associations which they were unable to dissolve, but so what they did was to start another association with the same name, like a human rights association, but by governmental staff. So they had the same association with the same title. So this replacement was being used, and they also clearly adopted this by supporting the Sufi school of thought in order to make it in its service.
اعتبرت المذهب المالكي والنهج الصوفي جزء من الهوية الوطنية لجميع إمارات الاتحاد.
This Sufi and Maliki schools of thought were introduced as part of the Emirati identity, and this was an innovation by the Crown Prince in order to mix the political with the religious. And we know that there are some Emirates who were not along the Maliki school of thought anyway. Most of the northern Emirates were on the Hanbali school of thought, Islamic school of thought, but they were forced to go with the same identity, and so they established new institutions in 2005 where they had all the leaders of the Sufi school of thought from the Levant and Egypt and elsewhere. Like Mr. Humaid mentioned, this started to create even problems with their neighbors, such as the clash with the Wahhabis. And then in 2014, we had the establishment of the Muslim Wise Men Board, which was meant to be a replacement of any jurisprudence body. But the problem was that when they had an appetite to continue those endeavors and they found that they were successful, they did not stop there by forcing people on the Maliki school of thought, but they, by using the pretext of tolerance, they started the issue of the Ibrahimi religion. And here I would like to say that talking or doing without the differences was not actually the purpose, but it was blurring and shaking the foundation of religion in the minds of people. So religion loses its status. The government has also introduced many changes and amendments in laws, particularly those which were based on the Islamic Sharia, and replaced them with others based on positive law, including civil marriage. To conclude, in the UAE, we don't have enough transparency, so you can't have an accurate measure of the magnitude of the problem. But the government has been greatly been able to defame the Islamic movement at the beginning, at least, but those who interacted with this defamation were mainly those affiliated with the security. And a study that was conducted later showed that all the defamation of the Muslim Brotherhood and the Islamic movement, more than 65% of the Emiratis still thought positively of the Muslim Brotherhood and the Islamic movement, and they were not affected by that defamation. Another issue is that they were able to use fierce power and draconian security measures to co-opt religion and Friday sermons to its interest. And I have to point out here that the reform movement, the Islamic reform movement, from the very beginning used a peaceful approach, and that's why they took they didn't want to destabilize the state, which is under internal and external threats, and we didn't want to contribute to that threat and destabilization. Finally, the state has to be aware of the reaction of the community towards this replacement of scholars by for someone like Muhammad Shahrour, or for the drama like Al-Hallaj, as I mentioned. Those reactions have to be indicative for the state. And I conclude by saying that I believe that leadership in the UAE is undertaking a review of this approach, and I believe that their approach will be or should not be as draconian and extreme, and I expect some changes and modification to the approach and attitude of the state. Thank you so much.
أستاذ أحمد تحدث في بداية حديثه أن الدين
Mr. Ahmed at the beginning mentioned that religion constitutes an essential foundation for Emirati identity, and it was included in the Constitution of the United Arab Emirates. As one of the articles of the Constitution said that the religion of the state was Islam, and that Sharia was the source of legislation and laws. And he said that the Emirates have always been full of Islamic scholars, and that this played a role in establishing Islamic values, and those scholars were not subject to the power of the state, and things remained that way until the 90s, where things started to change due to a number of incidents, such as the Iraqi invasion of Kuwait, the attempted assassination of Hosni Mubarak, and then 9/11, where we witnessed the new phase with the advent of the Crown Prince Mohammed bin Zayed, and then also after the death of Sheikh Zayed, where the state started to take a different orientation to the liking of the Crown Prince. And in this tendency, religion was meant to be in the service of the state, not the other way around. And in order to achieve that, there were three strategies used. First was the defamation and deformation. The second, co-option, control, and absenting. Third was filling the gaps and replacement. He spoke in details about those three strategies, and he said that they reached a point where arbitrary detention was used about opposition. The first strategy, which is defamation and deformation, was one of the most important tools of demonization used by the regime against its opponents and against the Islamic movement, and it commissioned its security apparatus for that purpose, who invested a lot in order to defame, particularly on social media, the Islamic figures as well as religious people. And he used a number of examples, such as what some satellite channels did in defaming the people who signed the March petition, which included very legitimate demands, and then also the use of social media by security apparatus for defamation and deformation, by branding them as part of the Muslim Brotherhood, and by accusing them of following external agendas. And also they started to target the public good associations and human rights associations or civil society associations. The second strategy was co-option and control. The state used legal and illegal tools in order to prevent the voices of reformists to the public sphere. For example, they started by excluding teachers from the locals who belong to the Islamic movement, and also excluded many of the Jum'ah or Friday speakers and preachers, and they restricted lectures and trainings with to be pending on security clearance. And they dissolved some of the civil society associations, such as Al-Islah and Al-Irshad associations in the different Emirates. To conclude, those, or in a nutshell, those practices caused some restrictions and also exclusion from the public sphere of those Islamic figures. And finally, the third strategy was replacement and filling the gap. They were aware that there would be a gap after this exclusion, so they started this replacement by taking control of the junctures of religious public posts, by introducing people who were pro-government. And for example, they replaced the teachers and administrative staff of schools with foreigners, and they changed the identity in universities as well, which were assimilated to foreign universities, and all the Friday preachers were replaced and were given a huge space in media as well. And at that stage, the government worked on this strategy also by bringing people who would defame religion and religious people, including through arts and drama, for example, by through Al-Hallaj drama, and even by introducing or changing the Islamic school of thought followed in certain Emirates, and by promoting the Sufi school of thought in order to co-opt the Sufi school of thought for its own purposes. And then they established in 2014 the Muslim Wise Men Council, which was a replacement for any jurisprudence forum. It also allowed adultery, civil marriage, and transformed and changed many of the common moral values of society through using those three strategies. The result was that the government was able to deform and defame the Islamic movement, particularly at the beginning with the different campaigns. But the people who were misled by this defamation was small, particularly those affiliated with the security apparatus. And according to a poll, 65% of the Emiratis continue to have a good conception of the Muslim Brotherhoods and the Islamic movement. The second issue was that through the security approach and intimidation, they were able to introduce a strict and tight control of the religious discourse. And a third is that the state is nonetheless running against the reality of rejection of the community and condemnation by the community of the replacement of those scholars and by the new tendencies. So at the end of the last decade, which was an important juncture in the history of the UAE, he believes the Emirate is undertaking a review of its approach. Thank you so much. We now move to our third speaker about the Islamic movement and policies of exclusion and uprooting.
Thank you,
Doctor, for giving me the opportunity to speak about this important issue. My paper will be about the people the government's employment of exclusion, the Islamic movement, I will speak in three axes. The first one will be introduction, then I will move to the tools and the periods or the phases of exclusion, and I will conclude with the conclusions. First, I would like to say that the UAE was established in 1971, and it was about seven Emirates that have different approaches sometimes and dealing with the issues. The first Islamic institutional work was established in 1974, which is 3 years after the foundation of this state. That was in the beginning in Dubai, Emirates, and the Al-Islah association received funding from the Dubai government, and it was given a territory, and the ruler of Dubai at the time, Sheikh Rashid bin Saeed Al Maktoum, may he rest in peace, inaugurated the center. After a while, there were branches of Al Islah Association in Ras Al Khaimah, Al Fujairah, Emirates, and other institutions were established under the name of Al Irshad Association in Ajman. After the words, the Islamic Forum was established in Asharqa. All of these institutions are from one Islamic movement, which is Dawat al-Islah movement. The only emirate that didn't give any work for this Islamic movement was Abu Dhabi, and they didn't allow them to do any activities in Abu Dhabi. In the mid 70s and till the end of 80s, the Islamic movements had a lot of work in the Emirates, so they developed the curricula, and they were in the ministries of the justice, education, and higher education, and they established the first Islamic bank in the world, which is Dubai Islamic Bank, and a number of other charities that became international organizations like Al-A'mal Al-Khairiyat or a charity association. I believe that a lot of people can see a lot of issues that were practiced by the government. The Islamic work in the United Arab Emirates was from different groups, like the Salafists, who didn't have any institutional dawah work, but they have some charities through which they were working. And there was the some young people who adopted the thought of Sheikh Mohammed bin Yusuf, and they were working with some figures with the state. After this introduction, I'm going to start with the phases of and tools of exclusion. The phases of exclusion, I can categorize them into two categories. The first one about the soft tools or the soft power. It was in the beginning of 80s, although the 80s was the peak of the institutional Islamic work, but they were attempts by the authority to negatively affect the Islamic work in different ways. The authority used different smooth ways or soft powers to do that from the beginning of the 80s till the end of the 90s. And there are some of the tools. First, not giving the licenses for the Islamic works. And some emirates like Abu Dhabi use the authority they have not to open any institutions for the Islamic work. Number two, the direct impact. Some security forces try to influence some figures who belong to the Islamic movement using their relatives or personal knowing. And it was effective, and they left the Islamic work. If the direct influence didn't work, they would use for example, the fathers to prevent their sons from working on that. The second three, using rumors about some figures. For example, there were rumors about weapons that are present under the center of the Al-Islah Association. And there was also another rumor that a military helicopter dropped a tank in the center of the Al-Islah Association. And so many rumors continue to happen until this day. The fourth point, I can say that it is keeping them busy all the time, keeping them busy, which means to calling members of the people working in the Islamic movement from different groups to the security, stopping some people in the airports and not to renew their business work, and moving some of the Islamic figures from the education ministries to the ministries of services and other ministries. This keep the figures of the Islamic movement under tension and under concern, And in 1997, two members of the Islamic activity were arrested for 3 months, and that was an unprecedented in the history of the United Arab Emirates. The next point, or the fifth tool, and in 1994, the board of directors of Al-Islah Association in Dubai and Al-Fujairah was dismantled, and that step was the reason of stopping the entire work of the association in Dubai and Al Fujairah and stopping the Al Islah magazine later. This phase was the phase of the soft tools. Now we move to the hard tools that were used. This began in the 90s, but it came very clearly in the beginning of the second millennium, especially in the post 9/11 in New York. Under the there was security pressure imposed upon the people, and especially for those who follow the thoughts of Muhammad bin Surur. And some of the leaders who adopted the thoughts of Muhammad bin Surur, they were different. Uh, we don't know whether the leadership were infringed or infiltrated by the security to change, to attract young people and to change their minds, or to hold their work altogether. This is something that I will answer later. So this group in 2002, they was dismantled and no influence was left for this group afterwards. There were still some figures here and there, but the thought of this sheikh was only in the minds of some individuals, but not as an institutional work. In 2003, Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed, the deputy crown prince, sent a direct threat to Al-Islah group to stop their work, or they will have seen the repercussion. And Al-Islah didn't respond to that. And for example, they were prevented from employment, so they will not have any security clearance for employment. And if they are appointed, they don't get any bonuses, or they will be sent to early retirement. The second issue, stripping the nationality of the state. And for example, in the United Arab Emirates, stripped the nationality of 7 members of Al-Islah, and in 2016 they stripped the nationality from a number of detainees and other people who were not detained, and as well as their children. The other point was not to renew their passports, the passports of the people, and closing some civil society organizations that are led by members from the Islamic movement. And one of the points or the steps of the hard or the hard tools was the arresting some members for imprisonment rulings up to 15 years. In addition to that, there were defamation campaigns in social media and in traditional media, and there were a number of documentaries that were published, like for example, The Road to July. It was published on or aired on Al Arabiya, and another one, Betraying a Homeland, that was aired on Abu Dhabi National TV, in addition to a number of articles, lectures, conferences for the same objective, to defame those people. In addition to that, the detainees were under a number of different torture means. Some of them were in solitary confinement, some of them were in cold cells, prevented from contacting with their lawyers, or put for long years in a prison, and putting them into a trial without the right to appeal, and with the imprisonment reaching 15 years. In addition to that, there were arrests that took place in 2014. These arrests were conducted against Al Manara young people. They were Salafists and they don't represent the traditional Salafi current. They were working in a mosque, and when they were arrested, they paralyzed the last organized Islamic work in the country, and a number of the members of this group were under so many means of torture. With these arrests, we can say that the organized Islamic work in the United Arab Emirates has been totally paralyzed. Of course, we have a broad Salafi current in the United Arab Emirates, but as I said, that this current is not working under one umbrella, but rather working disparately, individually, and sometimes they were used they were accused of being part of Al Manara or part of Al Islah, but they continued to be rejecting of any means or any unmoral, immoral things that are taking place in the country. And then any there was a law that was issued that any person who rejects the vice in the community, it is considered a verdict or a fatwa, and nobody is allowed to get a fatwa other than the Grand Mufti, and they will be arrested. There was also another electronic campaign, which and the campaign was under the new Islah Association, and it targets the Salafi group, and that was enough to put them away from working in public affairs. The security forces in the United Arab Emirates didn't suffice with excluding the role of the Islamic movements, but also excluding and dismantling any organized work that has the sense of opposition. In the last year, the authority has taken the liberals and the nationalists, and even those figures were also targeted by the authority, and they were. We have examples on this issue, and this is not the place to speak about those figures. I will move now to some of the conclusions of this exclusion. The most important feature is the absence of the Islamic movement from the public sphere. In the United Arab Emirates, there is no role of the Islamic movement, and unfortunately, this absence had very serious effects on the United Arab Emirates at large and the citizens. For example, the absence of for example, the educational centers. Now there are no independent educational centers affiliated with the associations, and all the associations are governmental institutions, and they are not NGOs or civil society organizations, and they all have a governmental agenda, and this of course has a negative impact on the Emirati people, and the absence of these educational centers starts to appear already. The second point is the passing a number of laws, as Mr. Ahmed and Mr. Ahmed mentioned. So many laws that were against the values of the community were passed without any opposition, because the mass bloc that is against these laws are either in prisons or they are outside the prisons, but they are silent and they can't speak. And we can see some of the results is the normalization of the Zionists, and this is one of the results of the absence of the Islamic movement. And the last result, which will be the conclusion of this paper, the UAE foreign policy that is extremist. And we can see that we have an extreme or radical foreign policy that is based on the rule: if you are not with me, then you are against me, and that the ends justify the means. And so many means are not appropriate, or they are against the values that we believe in. So this radical foreign policy impacted the image of the United Arab Emirates, and it brought a lot of enmities at the level of the Arab peoples as well as some Arab governments because of these policies. Thank you very much. This is the end of my paper. Thank you very much, Mr. Hamad. Mr. Hamad started that the UAE was established in 1971 as a state based on the Islamic Sharia, part of the Muslim world and the Arab nation. That was mentioned in 7 articles, and the Islamic work started 3 years after this, the foundation of the state in 1974, and there were a number of associations under the name of Al-Islah or Al-Irshad association in 6 different Emirates. The only Emirates that didn't license them to work was Abu Dhabi, where the rulers of Abu Dhabi at the time didn't allow the Islamic work through institutions. This phase continued from the mid-70s till the end of 1980s, and it is considered the peak of the Islamic activity. And some of those who belong to the Islamic movement were in different high levels in the institutions of the country, like, for example, the Ministry of Education. They also established the first Islamic bank, which is the Dubai Islamic Bank, and they established, for example, the Al-Amal Al-Khairiyya charity. Of course, the work of the Islamic movement doesn't is not only in the work of the Al-Islah or Al-Irshad. There was a group which is a Salafi group, but they didn't have an institutional work. They provided some charity, but it wasn't institutional. And then there was a number of then the phase of exclusion, and he divided into 2 periods. So one of the use of the soft tools and the other one with the hard tools. The one of the soft tools, it was since the 80s till the end of the 90s, and although the 80s was the peak of the work of the Islamic work, but there were attempts by the authority to impact or to affect this as Islamic association negatively, including, for example, not giving licenses for the Islamic work, impact the direct influence of some people, spreading rumors against the Islamic figures and Islamic associations. And the 4th point was the keeping them busy with, for example, summoning them to the security apparatus, arresting others, for example, in the airports, stopping the or freezing the business licenses, and stopping other workers from working in institutions. For example, in 1994, the board of directors in Al Fujairah and in Dubai was dismantled, and that stopped the work of Al-Islah. The second phase was the hard tools that was used in the beginning of the 90s, where it became more obvious in the post 9/11 events in the United States, which had different features. First one, crushing on the young people who follow Mohammed bin Sroor, thought to stop their activity. The second one was the direct threat, and that was in 2003 when the Prince Crown, or the Crown Prince, who was the Deputy Crown Prince at the time, and he stopped. He sent threats to the Al-Islah to stop their activity. At the time, there were different security, draconian security works, like, for example, stripping the citizenship from members, not renewing the passports of some people, and closing down the civil society organizations if those organizations are led by Islamists. The wide campaign of arrests that happened in 2012, which led to arresting people for long periods of time, up to 15 years, and the defamation on media, social media, and TV channels, of official TV channels, as well as scores of articles, conferences, and torturing the detainees and keeping them in cold solitary confinement, and depriving them from contacting with any legal representation. The question that some might ask about the Salafists at the time, and that the matter was not only against the Al-Islah group. Of course, the Salafists don't work under one umbrella, and they work in different fields, but they are used sometimes, or they were used sometimes by the authority to attack Al-Islah, and they prevented any opinion that can object to any vice in the community. They get considering it as a fatwa, and fatwa is prevented from being issued but from the Grand Mufti, and that was enough to exclude them, from exclude all Islamists from work. The conclusion of the work of the paper. The paper concluded a number of in conclusions that the security forces didn't suffice with excluding the members of the Islamic movement on only dismantling them, but they also excluded others like nationalists or liberals who don't have any impact. So neither Islamists nor others were allowed to do any to work in politics. The other point is that the absence of the Islamic movement from the sphere was very clear and obvious, and that led to some results that are very obvious. For example, the absence of educational centers, and the presence of or passing laws that are against the values of the society without any objection, because either those who oppose them are either in the prisons or outside, but silent because they're afraid of a prison. And the normalization with the Zionists, which became something that is supported by the state strongly. And fourth, the draconian or radical foreign policy against the Gulf states and others, and under the rule of, if you are not with me, you are against me, or under the rule that the ends justifies the means. And this led to inciting enmity against the Emirati people and Emirati state by different people. The fourth paper is for Dr. Walaa Quisay, which is about the role of the Islamic movement, a vision or a perspective from outside, and she's going to speak in English. So those who are who want to listen in Arabic, you can listen to the interpretation on the Arabic channel, or you can go to the English channel if you want to listen to the source language. The floor is yours.
Assalamu alaikum. Thank you, Professor Sami, for inviting me to this very esteemed panel. I'm very, very grateful. So in this paper, I would like to talk about the state-sponsored Islamic movement. So rather than just focusing on sort of the internal political formations that allowed for a particular religious discourse to reign supreme, I want to look at the external religious forces or the external religious discourses that then come to really cement the ideas of or the political ideology of the government. So and also cementing the authoritarian nature of the UAE government, which then later led to the Abraham Accords. So generally, authoritarian Arab regimes long before the Arab Spring, even those that espoused secular values, such as the Syrian regime, used religion and religious groups as integral to their policy strategies. We've seen this in Egypt, we've seen this in Saudi Arabia, we've seen this in Libya. In the case of the UAE, and particularly now, we have to pose the question, how do we make sense of a discourse of religious toleration, interfaith initiative, and even appeals to a particular discourse on orthodoxy that then lead to the authoritarian character of the state and eventually transforming the foreign policy of said state as well. So first, I want to talk about Mohammed bin Zayed and his relationship with Islamism as a general umbrella term. Of course, as we know that this term is rife with contestation, and it's often used in Western literature to include everything from, really radical violent groups to people who use Islam as a guiding force to their political values. So after 9/11, the UAE was put in a corner and became a very strong ally in the war on terror. This unqualified support came as a result of the fact that the US government had intervened and stated that 2 of the hijackers had been Emirati citizens and the others had flown through Dubai. Furthermore, the 9/11 Commission found that there was a financing operation that went through the Hawala system in the UAE. And so as a result, this led the American government to put increased pressure on the Emirati government in order to have unqualified support on the war on terror. So according to Richard Clark, the then US National Coordinator for Counterterrorism, Hamza bin Zayed, who was, of course, not yet Crown Prince, not yet in charge, had convinced his father to arrest 200 Emirati nationals and 1,600 residents on terror charges. In 2007, when he became the de facto leader, university professors, school teachers with purported Islamist sympathies were subsequently terminated from their religious position, from their positions, or were sidelined. Mohammed bin Zayed even boasted to an American diplomat that the government had closed down 80% of its so-called extremist Quran schools. And this is when the so-called Sufi kind of orientation, or what I call the neo-traditionalist school comes in, or the neo-traditionalist scholars come in. So the reason I use this term is that even though they espouse to a particular strand of Sunni Sufism, they also emphasize the importance of following a particular madhab, not going outside of the madhab for other opinions. So they're very madhabi in that sense. So, and they're Ash'ari. Some of them are Maturidi, but they're mainly Ash'ari in creed, and they're madhabi, and they believe in tasawwuf. So when we want to understand why these folk were especially important, you have to look at the way that they see religious crisis in the Muslim world that has purportedly marginalized their authority. So they assume that they represent an Orthodox Islam that was marginalized with the rise of Islamism, with the rise of Salafism, which is to them like a modernist innovation. So the root of the crisis for them is fawda al-fatawa, the chaos of fatwa, right? And so they believe that particular scholars have the authority to give out fatwas, and that independent ijtihad is a problem. which sounds simple enough, right? So it makes sense that that religious scholars are afraid of the fact that everyone on the internet has a religious opinion and is following a particular fatwa. Why this particular concept of fawd al-fatwa is important to the state is it allows the state to monopolize religious discourse and the fatwa making process. So it becomes a very, very marginal thing where the state is really the only thing that creates religious discourse, creates the boundaries of what is legitimate versus what is illegitimate. So I want to talk, and I'll talk generally about it, but I want to zoom into two figures. The figure of Sheikh Abdullah Binbaya from Mauritania, who is the president of the Forum for Promoting Peace in Muslim Societies. I think now they've changed it to the Abu Dhabi Peace Forum. I'm not sure. And his student Hamza Yusuf, who's an American white convert to Islam, who's also the president of Zaytuna College, the accredited Muslim college here in America. So when we want to focus, or we want to see like the discourses of these guys and why they become so prominent, first of all, they have a lot of legitimacy and they have a lot of capital within the Muslim community. So that's something to keep in mind. These aren't marginal figures. These aren't Islam al-Bahiri types. They're established scholars and sheikhs, right? Especially Abdullah Binbaya, who has a huge scholarly credential. So I just want to read out something small that in 2014, when the forum was established, Hamza Yusuf has said. So Hamza Yusuf had said that the religious havoc allowing for common people or awam to make rulings was the problem, and that an unlearned class of people emerged to usurp the authority of established scholars and political power. So the idea is the Islamists have a flawed understanding of Islam, and they're there to, they have an internal logic that they always want to usurp power. The core problem of conflicts is the assailants, the Islamists, present himself as the sole representative of Islam and the inheritor of the tradition. So already in his internal discourse, the project that they're trying to establish represents a sort of pluralism, a sort of openness, whereas these other guys are closed-minded, these other guys are violent, these other guys do not listen to anyone else. So already you can see that even though the government is directing its violence and its power towards the Islamists, it still can present itself as tolerant, whereas the people is oppressing, they're the intolerant. And then he goes on to add, and this is very interesting and very bizarre for, I guess, an American-born scholar to say, he who looks on history will find that the duties of the Ummah is to respect al-Sultan, the leader. We should not obey them if they compel us to drink wine or to kill a human soul. But this is the principle. The leader, al-Sultan, is the shadow of Allah. And he says this, Dhullallah fil ard. And then he goes on to add, the Qadi Abu Bakr Tartushi in Siraj al-Muluk used to say, as you are, so will your rulers be. Kama takunu yuwalla alaykum. And I found this as an axiom in the Book of Allah. In this way, we make some evildoers have power over others through their misdeeds. So there's kind of an internal discourse here where if a people are oppressed, then or if the leaders oppress the people, then it's due to the evil that the people have begotten on themselves. And we hear this sometimes in masjids, and we hear this in some of the books of Torah, but it's particularly significant that Abdullah bin Zayd was sitting here, Muhammad bin Zayd was sitting there, Abdullah bin Bay was sitting here in the first row, and there an American sheikh is proclaiming that the Sultan is the shadow of God on earth. So how did this forum for promoting peace come to be, and why is it so significant? And I think I'll start from there, and it'll kind of go through that, the significance of it, and how it then leads to something like the Abraham Accords, which is a political move, not necessarily an interfaith organization or initiative, but the logic kind of fits. So in 2004, Abdullah Binbaya was actually a founding vice president of the International Union of Muslim Scholars, where Sheikh Yusuf al-Qaradawi was the president. So he was very close to Sheikh Yusuf al-Qaradawi for over a decade. In that period, they worked together. They had a similar concept of wasatiyya that Abdullah Binbaya now actually uses, but inverses it in order to justify a kind of more pro-authoritarian move. So Qaradawi and Binbaya share a kind of similar religious outlook, particularly in fiqh. Even though Abdullah Binbaya is Maliki, so that's where they kind of depart. But in their understanding of using, for example, the Charter of Medina as a tool or as an example, they both share that commitment. They both share that understanding. And other principles like fiqh al-waqi'. So in 2012, Morsi is elected by a small margin to the presidency in Egypt. And of course, as like everyone here knows, the government of the United Arab Emirates was not super happy about that. It kind of, in a way, threatened the order, or it threatened the order that they saw was supposed to be legitimate in the region. And then in August 2013, the Egyptian military killed over 1,000 people in the Rab'a massacre. So Sheikh Yusuf al-Qaradawi, of course, expressed anger towards the massacre, condemned it. But Sheikh Abdullah Binbaya was quiet. And even though he was a member or a vice president of the International Union of Muslim Scholars, that seemed to kind of mark a rift between Sheikh Qaradawi and Sheikh Abdullah Binbaya. Only a month later, or even less than a month later, on September 7, 2013, Sheikh Abdullah Binbaya resigned from the International Union of Muslim Scholars. He didn't give much of an explanation, but the little explanation that he gave is, he said, the modest part that I'm trying to play in pursuit of reform and compromise, maslaha, which requires a discourse that is not compatible with my position at the International Union of Muslim Scholars. So this marks a rift, and then a year later, the Forum for Promoting Peace is established. Now, already before the establishment of the Forum for Promoting Peace and before the resignation of Sheikh Abdullah Binbaya, there seems to have been connections between Abdullah Binbaya and the leadership in the UAE. So on February 24th, 2013, Abdullah bin Zayed visited Binbaya in his home in Jeddah, where he was a professor, to discuss the state of the Ummah and the possibilities of revival. 2 months later, Binbaya met the UAE Crown Prince Mohammed bin Zayed at the Global Vaccine Summit. In July 2013, Binbaya traveled to Abu Dhabi to give a lecture in honor of Sheikh Zayed. This was supposed to be, this was sponsored by the General Authority for Islamic Affairs and Endowment. The visit was scheduled 2 months after the UAE and other Gulf states pledged 12 billion to the leaders of the coup in Egypt. So this is kind of the trajectory of how the Forum for Promoting Peace was started. But as the esteemed panel here has shown, that there has been somewhat of a history of sponsoring Sufi groups and sponsoring Sufi ideas within the UAE. Of course, this happened in conjunction with sponsoring other movements that were notably modernist or Jami. Here in 2005, Habib Ali Jifri founded the Taba Foundation in the UAE, and this was the first initiative in the Emirates to support that particular community or group of neo-traditionalist Sufis. So there were others, but that particular crowd was brought in by Habib Ali Jifri. And then you have in 2009, Arif Ali Nayed established the Kalam Research and Media Center in Dubai, which again sounds harmless enough, you know, reviving the study of Kalam is not necessarily a political move, but in this instance it is, because it's a part of building a kind of counter narrative that in Islamic history or in the modern Islamic history, there's been a decline that was a result of the abandonment of these issues. And again, that's not necessarily political, but in this case it is, because the problem is presented as a result of the abandonment of particular Sufi sheikhs and the abandonment of particular scholars, particular ulama, and the rise of Islamism and the rise of people who call for particular political agencies. So again, it seems quite benign and on the surface, but there's a lot of intellectual history that goes into the politicization of these issues. And so there are three policy initiatives in sort of my estimation, or three types of policy initiatives that are sponsored through these neo-traditionalist movements. The first you have are interfaith initiatives, or initiatives that are calling for minority rights, and the Marrakesh Declaration is the first thing that comes to mind. There are, of course, other initiatives, particularly with the advent of the idea of the Abrahamic religion, which becomes very, very potent for political reasons. And then you have initiatives which I call Orthodoxy Initiatives, which, interestingly enough, I think were instigated by the Kingdom of Jordan, and I think the UAE government then joined along. So you have a common word between us, you have a letter to Baghdadi. All these initiatives are under this umbrella. And then you have the third initiative, which is like the Forum for Promoting Peace, which synthesizes the interfaith dimensions and the orthodoxy dimensions, but contextualizes it for political purposes. So what does the UAE gain, or what does the government of the UAE gain out of promoting particular interfaith initiatives? Well, the first thing is attracting conservative allies from particularly the United States. So right-wing conservatives in the United States have been particularly concerned with the plight of Muslim minorities, and particularly Christian minorities. So the idea of talking in the language of the interfaith is very important, not just for the liberal wishy-washy aspects of it, but also in attracting very specific allies on the right. The Orthodoxy Initiatives positions political Islam and Salafism as enemies of the state and outside the margins of Islam. Now, they don't make takfir, because that point is very, very important to them, because in their head, that puts them apart from other Salafis, who to them are all takfiri, right? But what they do is they say that these folk are khawarij. They are, I guess, outside of the margins of orthodoxy, because they have a particular political agenda. They're akin to the Khawarij. And we've seen Ali Gum'a in Egypt use that to criminalize the protesters in Rab'a, and to basically, so my intervention on all of this is, what I say is that the state, in a sense, hires particular epistemic communities or communities of knowledge, which they can then fire, right? So these shuyukh, these scholars, have a particular religious agenda, have a particular set of epistemic values, from which they derive legitimacy with society, with their interlocutors, and the state has its agenda. And there's a process of negotiation between these communities of knowledge, or these epistemic communities, and the state, with the state obviously having the power of coercion, the power of discourse, the power to create reality. So in a sense, this is what happens. So we see that even within the internal discourse, or the internal philosophical understandings of these neo-traditionalists, things start to shift when they need to bend to the demands of the state. So whereas before they had criticized modernity as being the ultimate evil, now they're seeing the nation state as a necessary part and parcel to maintain the tradition. And that's something that's quite bizarre, quite weird. Like, the nation state is the modernizing factor in all of this, right? But to them, their need for stability, their need for hierarchy can only feature through these blocks. So things that would have been completely like obscene in the past, and now starting to change, right? But the interesting thing about epistemic communities is, just as states can hire epistemic communities, they can fire them as well. Or they can hire several epistemic communities that have contradicting visions. And that's what we've seen. We've seen staunch modernists with neo-traditionalists. These guys hate each other, yet they create reality in a particular way that allows for the discourse of the state to be intelligible. All in all, presenting a particular internal enemy, a demonized figure, an elusive figure of an Islamist. But just as the Western counterparts, the notion of Islamism becomes diluted as anyone enacting their independent political agency, particularly if they use Islam as a standard. So anyone can be called an Islamist if they have an opposition, or something makes them feel uncomfortable about the way things are going. And so it becomes a way for states to discipline their societies and kind of use the threat of force generally to them so they can obey. And this is something that's quite interesting, because when Abdullah bin Zayed also threatened Western communities, or when he said to Western governments, you don't know these guys, we know them better than you do. These guys are potential terror blocks or whatever. You need to let us deal with them.
Can you conclude in a couple of minutes?
Yeah, of course. When he said that, and then they declared many organizations in the West, including Islamic Relief and MAB, as terrorist organizations, they used the and they helped sponsoring particular right-wing and alt-right movements. They used the imagined threat of violence to control entities that they basically couldn't control. If you feel that you're under threat of violence everywhere, that's the method that that was used. And finally, I just want to say that the conservative allies that they try to make connections with as through these interfaith initiatives care about the plight of minorities, and they care about the safety of Israel, right? And the interfaith initiatives started out small and then kind of erupted into this show of, 2019 is the year of tolerance. We need to make an Abrahamic prayer space where there's a temple, a mosque, and a church. And even if you read the Abraham Accords, you see that this discourse of interfaith is interwoven in it as a kind of smokescreen for something more sinister, something more bigger, which is normalization. And even when we say the word normalization, it seems not as sinister, but I don't even think the word normalization really fits in what's happening, because it's more of an alliance between the government of the United Arab Emirates with Israel. It's not just a normalization of relations. And so I guess this is the end. Thank you so much, Professor Sami, for giving me this opportunity.
Thank you so much, Dr. Walaa, for your presentation. I will try to summarize very quickly. Dr. Quisay looked into the external forces that cemented the political ideology and the authoritarian regimes that led to the Abraham Accords. This trend, she says, that we had seen or have been seeing in many regimes, such as in Syria, Libya, Egypt, and others, it transforms also the foreign policy of these countries, and of course that includes the United Arab Emirates. She says that after 9/11, UAE became a strong ally with the United States due to the US intervention and the US belief that because two hijackers were were UAE citizens, that they have to crack down into their Islamic networks, and including, of course, financial transactions through the Hawala system. So the US put a tremendous pressure on the United Arab Emirates. After 2007, Mohammed bin Zayed became in charge and started the program of elimination and marginalization. He also encouraged Sunni Sufism movements, which are Ash'ari in nature, and they represent a strand of Islam that was marginalized by modern Islamic movements. So they were elevated through the MBZ work. These trends had problem with fatwa chaos and ijtihad in general. So it's up to the state, they believe it's up to the state to decide on religious discourse and the role of Islam in society. She talked about Sheikh Hamza Binbaya and his deputy Hamza Yusuf. And these are not marginal figures, but established scholars. And they believe that they believe in the idea that the Islamists use Islam for political gains and have an agenda that excluded traditional scholars. They believe that leaders in Islamic societies have absolute right to be obeyed, followed, supported, even believing that the ruler, quote unquote, is the shadow of God on earth. Abdullah Binbaya was a founder of the Union of Islamic Scholars back in 2004. He was even the deputy of Qaradawi. He was very prominent in that organization. He was in Jeddah at the time. But throughout the years after Morsi was elected in Egypt in 2012 and elected as Egypt's president, the United Arab Emirates was unhappy about that, and they felt threatened. So they supported the coup that took place in 2013 after the overthrow of Morsi, Qaradawi was very critical, but Binbaya was silent. So almost few weeks after that, he resigned from the union and started another organization with the encouragement and support of the UAE under the name Forum for Promoting Peace in Islamic Societies. That relationship between traditional scholars with UAE leaders was cemented and grew. She also mentioned another or several other leaders such as Habib Jifri, Ali Juma, and others, who established also an association with the United Arab Emirates. She said there are three types of initiatives that the UAE encouraged. First is the initiative, Interfaith Initiative, calling for minority rights, which led eventually to the Abraham Accords. Second initiative she called Orthodoxy Initiatives, in which it's the major things is to declare political Islam and Salafis as the enemies of Islam. The word that they use is Khawarij, or rebels. And the third is instituting the Forum for Promoting Peace, which is used for political manipulation by the government. One of the objectives of the UAE in that is to attract conservative allies in the United States, which are concerned about Christian minorities as well as Israel, the safety of Israel in the Middle East. There is a process, she says, of negotiation between the scholars and the state, where it is not a balanced one, since the state has the power of coercion and of creating realities on the ground to influence and manipulate these scholars for political gains. The same, these scholars that they were used or hired by the state, they could easily be fired, replaced, or marginalized. She also pointed out that this process also results in diluting Islamism and Islamic discourse, since they have a way to discipline society and bring into the fold. The UAE policies use the imagined threat to control organizations that they cannot control, because these Western evangelical movements also believe or support strongly the safety of Israel. They also influence the state policy into what is called normalization. But she says it's not just normalization, but there is a huge shift into establishing an alliance throughout the region with the state of Israel. Thank you so much, Dr. Walaa. I'm going to switch now to Arabic. الآن المداخلة الأخيرة هي
Now we have our final speaker, Dr. Anas Altikriti, who will talk about lessons learned, and then we will have final comments and a final chance for speakers to respond. In the name of God, the merciful, the compassionate, thank you so much, Dr. Sami, and I thank the Center for Islam and Global Affairs at Sabahattin Zaim University in Istanbul. Also, I would like to thank all the speakers today. Our symposium has been very rich and fruitful, and one of the problems with that is that the last speaker would have very little to say or to add. I will be very brief because we're running out of time, but the question that rose to my mind while listening to the papers by my colleagues was the question why, and I believe this question why is pivotal in our attempt to understand what is going on in the relationship between the regime and the Islamic movement. This symposium is very important, that tackles this the Islamic movement in different countries, Iraq, Saudi, Kuwait, and today we're talking about the UAE. Actually, I will have to say that there is distinguished character for the reform Islamic movement and the Emirati Islamic movement for a number of reasons. The first is the raison d'etre as well as the context of the emergence of this movement in a society that is largely homogeneous and largely religious. So the UAE as a community is not one that involves many ideological conflicts like other countries such as Iraq, Syria, and Egypt, for example. So the question is, what determines the framework of the relation between the Islamic movement and the regime, so much so that we reached to the clash that we are witnessing right now? For example, when we talk about 1994, when we talk about the detainees from the Islah or the reform Islamic movement, some were not. For example, Ahmed Mansour was a liberal, actually, not even from the Islamic reform movement. Maybe if we compare the numbers, 60,000 detainees in Egypt versus 94 in the UAE, that's minimal. But relative to the size of the UAE, which is a rather small state, and the locals or the local population is just above 1 million. So this number would be very significant. The other issue is that the impact of the influence of the state in its attitude against the Islamic movement is very shocking. So to go back to the question, yes, with the raison d'etre, this may shed light on the reality.
يعني بشكل
I will start
أنه كيف ينظر الإسلاميون
with how the Islamists in the world look at the Islah movement in the United Arab Emirates. This is very interesting for me because I see that the Islamic movement and the Islah movement in the United Arab Emirates is known through the practices of the regime, mostly in the region and in the world. Knowing the Islamists with the details and the nuances of al-Islah movement is
مثلا بحركة الإخوان المسلمين في مصر، وهذا أمر
knowing
اعتقادي هو لافت ويحتاج إلى نوع من الانتباه. دولة الإمارات بلد حديث تأسس في عام 1972 كما ذكرنا يعني وذكر الزملاء. المجتمع الإماراتي مجتمع متجانس ومجتمع محافظ، الدين فيه أمر طبيعي.
United Arab Emirates is a place that religion is nature. Its ideologies, maybe there are some ideologies like Nasserist or nationalists, but they are weak ideologies. The student movements and the Scout Boys movements, they started in the 80s. They are unlike other organizations, Islamic organizations that have been working in decades. For example, the Muslim Brotherhood from Egypt or from Palestine who came to the United Arab Emirates and started to work, for example, in education and teaching and building institutions upon which the United Arab Emirates society was built on. That's why the idea of organizing such activities that depend on pay attention to students and to the young people to build the Muslim society in order to improve it. So they started in the 70s by the establishment of the United Arab Emirates University, and the presence of the Islamists in the University of the Emirate start to appear, and then in other educational institutions like the Syndicate of Engineers and others. So the Islamic identity was present very clearly, and sometimes it was hegemonous. However, all of that was in a context. It was natural. There was no kind of contradiction or conflict. There was a kind of harmony. That's why they spread widely and quickly because the discourse wasn't strange from the society. That's why this was one of the means that were used by the regime to depict the activism Islam as something that is strange from the community of the United Arab Emirates. Of course, there are different factors. The time may not be enough to look into them, but of course, looking at the political system in the regime and how it is established, and it is based on an individual or a family, and this applies to the entire state. At some point, there was a kind of independence of the seven Emirates, but that independence went declined when the security concern was the main thing. So everybody was under the hegemony of the family, and not only the entire family, but a small number of the individuals of this family, and especially Mohammed bin Zayed and the family of Abu Dhabi. The
هو عامل مهم عفوا تداخلت عندي شوية الأصوات. العامل الاقتصادي عامل مهم. نحن لا نتكلم عن مثلا مجتمع فقير مدقع كادح محروم. نحن لا نتكلم عن
aspect is very important. We are not talking about a society that is poor or a society that is fighting to live, and this gives some distinguishing feature for the movement, because those who were, for example, in Egypt, in Iraq, or in Syria, they had some kind of a classification or a class strata that upon which they can build, but that wasn't present in the United Arab Emirates. Nevertheless, this happened, what we have all seen happen. And then there is, of course, the religious factor that all my colleagues mentioned, and I'm not going to add to that. The question that I will go back to, which is, what led the regime to conflict with this natural elements in the society? What led to this conflict? The question that we have, and some people who have to, it is a kind of analysis and some guesswork, because we don't have enough information to come up with an answer for that. But targeting this Islamic movement, is it a project that is held by that person who is Mohammed bin Zayed, or by the entire family, or is it a project that is imposed upon this group, or in order to target the Islamic movement? So the question is it an internal project from within, or is it an external project? Who decides on the parameters of the relation between the ruling family and the Islamic movement, or other movements that have a side of a change, so to speak? The other question: the United Arab Emirates today, little people know what are the practices of the United Arab Emirates in the country and within society. If you ask most people, they will talk about the five-star hotels, the beaches, the seven-star spas, richness, wealth, etc. That's what people know about the United Arab Emirates in the world. But when we speak about the politics of the United Arab Emirates in the region and beyond, people know more. So now people know that the United Arab Emirates is an international player, genuinely, and whether we like it or not. And this is not a kind of praising their role, but this is a reality. The United Arab Emirates are trying to bring about change. Even they are influencing the US elections. A few days ago, we have seen that the UAE has taken a different, a very strange position, and that they were not they didn't follow the United States position in the Russian-Ukrainian war. And Al-Utaiba has started to speak about the United States and the UAE relations as if they are peers, and not taking into consideration the size and the number, the population. And now he is speaking with the United States as peer-to-peer. And when, for example, they support the Sisi in Egypt or Haftar in Libya, or when they support some of the Houthi groups in Yemen, why? Why? Once again, is it an Emirati decision, Emirati planning, or are we speaking about the Emirates as a platform for a broader project that is broader than the United Arab Emirates, or the broader than the region, which is the new Middle East? I received an article by Mark Lynch today in the Foreign Affairs. It is called The End of the Middle East. In the introduction of the article, he speaks about what's happened in the Ethiopia and the war of the Ethiopian government against the rebels. He says that the government pushed that rebellion with the support of four countries from the United Arab Emirates. So the United Arab Emirates is not only functioning in the Middle East or in the Gulf region only. Now the UAE is playing a role in Thailand, in Malaysia, in Central Asia, and even in the United States of America. So the question is, and here this gives us light on the nature of the regime in comparison with the reformist movements, on top of which Al-Islah movement and the Al-Islah Islamic movement. To conclude my comment, actually, the role of the United Arab Emirates should not be reduced into the geographic boundaries of the UAE. That's why the Islamic movement, and maybe this can be one of the lessons learned. So the Islamic movement in the UAE, in order to confront this project, should think beyond the boundaries or think about these questions, because are they under the threat of Mohammed bin Zayed? So if Mohammed bin Zayed now is out of the landscape, will the project continue, or will it stop? The other question that they need to answer: what are the repercussions of this relations, or the lack of relation, or let's say the enmity, the marginalization and the exclusion by the regime to the Islamic movement? What are the repercussions for the Islamic movements in the region or the international movements? Will there be repercussions, and what are these repercussions? What I want to point out here is that the Islamic movement and the Islam movement are faced with a number of challenges. Most importantly is that the regime doesn't target it alone. The regime is targeting it because it is inside the homeland, but it became a justification for the United Arab Emirates to intervene in other countries and to support authoritarian and dictator and totalitarian regimes in the region to face the Islamic movements there. So this is a kind of renewal and of the discourse, and an attempt to find new strategies, not only to deal with the regime, but only to deal with the society from which it is emanating, and to which it belongs, and to get rid of the defamation, demonization, the accusations, in a way that or all of these practices are conducted by the regime because the regime wants to take this movement out of its constituency and the society that supports it. These are the points that I wanted to highlight as lessons learned from the Al-Islah movement in the United Arab Emirates, and the repercussions and the future prospects of that. Thank you very much, Dr. Anas. In his comments,
الدكتور أنس حول السؤال
Dr. Anas asked a question after listening to all of these papers. He asked the question, why? Because it is critical to answer this question in an attempt to understand what happens to the Islamic movement in the United Arab Emirates. He said that the Islamic movement in the UAE is distinguished, and it came in a conservative society. It was natural in its society. There were no conflicting ideologies. So what led us to this level of confrontation? He said that the detainees in UAE are not all are Islamists. Maybe the number is not a big number in comparison with other countries, but the impact on the society is very important, because when we are talking about 94 of the elites of the Emirati society in comparison with the population, this is a larger number. Many people might think or get their information about the practices of the regime, but knowing or learning about the Islamic movement in the United Arab Emirates is not similar to learning about other movements in the world. The UAE is a new, relatively new state in this. It was established in the 70s, and the Islamic movement is relatively new. And because of the presence of Islamists from other countries who came to the United Arab Emirates, and they worked in an institutional work. This context doesn't have any challenge or any confrontation with the authority or the state, but it was in a harmonious context. So what led the state to confront the Islamic movement was strange and not understood, maybe because of the security concern, and maybe because one individual is in control of the politics. The economic factor is an important one, but the UAE is a rich country by nature. So this gives questions about the practices against the Islamic movement. So the question is still, what made the regime confront the movement? And all of these, although all of these factors don't allow to such confrontation. So the question is this a project led by one individual or one family, or is it imposed upon that individual? So is it an external or internal project or a scheme? So the UAE is involved in a number of issues around the world, so it became an international player, whether we like it or not, even taking positions that on the surface or at face value, it seems that they are challenging the United States in some issues, like in Libya or in other issues. So the question, is it planned by the United Arab Emirates, or is it a part of a project, a wider project that includes the entire new Middle East? So the Islamic, because of the United Arab Emirates and the repercussions of their work is not limited to their borders. So the Islamic movement should answer or find answers to these questions. And what are the repercussions of this enmity, marginalization, and their impact on the Islamic movements in the region and around the world? There is a number of challenges, and it is obvious that the regime is not targeting the Islamic movement within Emirates only, but around the world in order to play a role wider than its boundaries. So the Islamic movement in the United Arab Emirates require to adopt a new strategy and a new discourse for the Emirati people that has gone through a campaign of defamation in order to take the movement out of its constituency. These are a number of questions that the movement should answer. Thank you, Dr. Anas. And now we will move to the comment, and it is by Mr. Ahmed Maulana, and it will be followed by 4 to 5 minutes for each speaker to answer and to give us their final remarks. We will be about 15 minutes after the allocated time, so please, we apologize for that. Thank you very much, Dr. Sami, and I'm really Of course, we appreciate to have people from the Gulf states that have political positions that they defend, and they take the position, they take the repercussions of that, or the consequences of their choices, which is different from other republics like Egypt and others. I will speak in 3 points. The first one is about the background and the conditions of the foundation of the state in the United Arab Emirates. To start with, this state were called the truest coast in the Gulf, and they were under the occupation of the British, but the Brits stayed there for several decades until the Arab nationalism has started to materialize, and the communism, especially in the Gulf. And there is a number of biographies of the Brits or British politicians that mentioned that with the, for example, the revolution of Zifar and other movements that started to show signs of places. So in 1968, the Brits announced that they will leave the Arab Gulf in 1971, and in the coming 3 years, there were efforts to establish a union of 9 Emirates, the 7 Emirates that constitute the United Arab Emirates, as well as Bahrain and Qatar. There were negotiations, and there were a number of differences on the capital city and the shares of votes, and which led to the independence of 3 countries in the 1971, 6 Emirates, which is the UAE, and the next year, the 7th Emirate joined them, and Bahrain and Qatar. So the factors of the establishment of the state itself were not natural. There was a kind of dividing and creating a state that doesn't that doesn't have this the components or the factors of the natural state. That's why the regional and international alliances are very influential in the state, and this is different from the states that are established in a natural or a normal state with factors that are coming in from within, not from factors coming from outside. When we speak about the Emirati people, we have a historic problem because, for example, 50, 70 years ago, we didn't have an Emirati identity, but there was an Arab identity or a tribal identity that is wider than the Emirati identity. The third problem is the components of the population in the United Arab Emirates. We are talking about 10 million people in the United Arab Emirates. 1 million of them are United UAE. We have 9.5% of the Emiratis are in the United Arab Emirates. So as whereas the Indians, for example, living in Emirates are more than the Emiratis. So in the Emirates or other Gulf states, we're not talking about normal states whose population are the majority, or the identity of the state is established according to the population, the original population. We have different peoples and people who are coming from different identities. So this creates a lot of impediments to the work inside the country. Now, when we talk about the activities of the Islamic movement or Al-Islah movement, of course, it is facing a lot of problems, especially after the Arab Spring. The narrative that says that we are only a reformist movement and that's it. This is a part of history, because that was in Egypt and in Tunisia. But when the people moved, those organizations arrived to the authority. That's why the regimes look at these movements as the first threat for those regimes. That's why when the revolution happened in Egypt, there were demands in the United Arab Emirates for reform and to have elections and parliament. But because of what's happened in the region in Egypt. So all the ideas that those movements are moderate and they don't create any threat to these regimes, this is not heard because these regimes believe that this threat for them is more threatening than ISIS itself, because you are, or because those movements are generating an alternative for the regime. All of the experiences in the region, for example, Al-Islah movement in Yemen or the Islamic movement in Morocco that were brought by the king to establish the government. So all of that created a threat to the regime. So I believe for the regimes to open the space for any reformist Islamic movement to work, this will be a challenge. So here we have three problems. As I said, we have a challenge about the nature of the state, why it was established, and the context in which it was established. Another challenge of the population, especially that we are talking about 1 million people, Emirati, from among 10 million people as a population of the United Arab Emirates. And the third one, the former narrative that puts the Islamic movement as moderate movement, a reformist movement. This narrative is not accepted anymore by the regimes, and they believe that those movements are existential threats to them. So they need to have a new narrative that takes into consideration these developments that are taking place and the conditions they are working. Thank you very much, Mr. Ahmed, for committing to the time and for your comment. Now we will move to the final part of this symposium, giving each speaker 4 to 5 minutes to give us their final remarks or answering some of the comments that we heard. And we will start with Mr. Humaid Alnuaimi.
أستاذ حميد تسمعني؟
Mr. Humaid, do you hear me? Are you there? Okay, until he gets back, we will start with Ahmed Alshaiba.
أستاذ أحمد تسمعني؟
ايوه معك حميد اخي الكريم.
حميد تفضل اخي، لو تفتح الكاميرا لو تتكرم
ان شاء الله.
تفضل
ان شاء الله. طيب، بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. حقيقة إن كان من زيادة
Actually, if I have any final remarks to add, what I heard from the dear panelists all revolves around core things, which are the dealing of the state with itself, so to speak, and with the region, and that the projects that are implemented should be in harmony and not confrontational with the region and with what can constitute a strategy and an identity that that is supposed to be inherited. There should be a sense of belonging and not a sense of hegemony, so to speak. So the problem is there is a kind of running after the Western identity, forgetting about our history and about the traditions, and looking for the Western secularism or a global identity, ignoring our traditions. We want to communicate with the international world, international community, but without forgetting about our own identity and our own history and all our links with the Arabism and our religions. So this belonging to the history and geography of the region and being reconciled with ourselves, this is the safety valve for us. We as Emirati activists, we need to reconcile with ourselves, to reconcile between the governor and the governed, to accept on or to agree on things that are in line with our Islamic history and our real identity. We don't want to get a lot of the Western traditions that are confrontational to our history and our values. We need to be proud of who we are rather than being proud of what is being said in some media outlets that we are good students of Western democracy and Western secularism. We need to learn what was good in our history and what makes us reconcile with ourselves. Going back to this issue is the safety valve for us. The governed and the governor of the United Arab Emirates, we hope that the political decision makers in the UAE can go back to these aspects to put us back on the right track, because as UAE people, we don't hold enmity against our governments, but we hope that our government and our decision makers to be on the same page with us as with the as Emirati people, because the Emirati people cannot be a global people or global citizens, or to be taken away from our Islamic history and the traditions, because this will we cannot be proud of ourselves if we don't reconcile with all of these inherited things, and we go back to our terms of reference. The governed and the governor in the United Arab Emirates, we should be on the same page on of this shared culture and on this solid ground. And when we do that, we will have a completely different UAE in their dealing with all of the projects in the region. Only if we reconcile with ourselves and we go back to our original constitution in the UAE when it was founded. The constitution said that the internal interests of the UAE are completely in line with our Islamic and Arab surrounding. Thank you indeed, Mr. Humaid. Now with Mr. Ahmed Rashid Alnuaimi, 4 to 5 minutes. Go ahead. Thank you very much. And I heard a lot of important points in the papers that were presented. And I would like to comment on something that was mentioned by Mr. Ahmed towards the end about our expectations of the reviewing our work, whether it is logical or not, without any evidence. And the other point is whether the state actually feels the threat that it announced against us in the beginning. The state knows that the Islamic movement in UAE doesn't have any intent to conduct any coup or to take power in the way that the state was speaking about. They projected some of the experiences in the region and on the Islamic movement, and the state, of course, holds all the strings in the state, and there was no violence in dealing with its reaction. But the state selected the extreme deterrent weapon and the state terrorism against the Islamic movement. And that's why in our analysis for the foreseeable future, if we say that it's going to review these practices, because at the foreign level, we see that the state has revised its steps, and we see how they revised their steps towards Qatar, and they they started to revise a number of other files and issues other than Qatar. And the enmity that was targeting Turkey turned into brotherhood and friendliness. Why did that happen? Because the state is reviewing their practices and what happened in the past few years, weighing the losses and the gains. My brother Hamad said that spoke about the losses that the Emirati society has felt due to these practices, and the United Arab Emirates doesn't look away from the sense of the society or the sentiment of the society. We can't imagine that they don't pay attention at all to the sentiments of the people. The people now see that, and they started to be fed up of a lot of the issues or the phenomena that they don't accept. And to give you one example only, the issue of normalization didn't receive any public acceptance, and those who has made some practices, they are from the within the security apparatus and from the government, and they are very few. Those who went to visit Israel, for example, and appeared on some social media, they are people who are unknown and they don't have any acceptance among the Emirati people. And this shows the Emirati government that they cannot go ahead with this change, and they need to revise their work. As they have conducted some revisions of their foreign policy, they need to do the same in their internal policy, domestic policy. Thank you very much. Thank you, Dr. Ahmed Alshaiba Alnuaimi. And now we move to Mr. Hamad Alshamisi. Thank you very much, Doctor. I don't have any final remarks. I just want to thank you for this invitation, and I hope to be with you again in other events. Thank you. Now we go to Dr. Walaa Quisay. If you have any final remarks, you are muted.
Sorry. Thank you very much, Professor Sami. I just wanted to say that I found particularly Dr. Anas's remarks really, really potent, and it's something that I guess we need to all consider and give serious consideration to, because we are living in a very decisive moment. The discourses may have seemed fringe at some point, but they are gaining legitimacy bit by bit. We see the document between the Pope and Ahmed Tayyib for human fraternity. These initiatives do have legitimacy and are gaining international legitimacy. The discourse of Abrahamic religions has become quite popular in university campuses. There's organizations funded for. So what I'm trying to say is, even though things that seemed fringe and out of the ordinary just a few years ago, these things are becoming much more mainstream now. And this is, I guess, a point where we need to really consider what do we do next, and what are the next steps. We can't underestimate the importance of the moment that we're in right now. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. شكرا جزيلا ولاء. الآن الكلمة الأخيرة.
Thank you very much, Dr. Walaa. And now the final word is with Dr. Altikriti. Thank you. Two quick points. The first one, based on what Dr. Walaa mentioned, we see a new kind of globalization. And this globalization is the globalization of confrontation with the Islamic movements. They are taking similar steps, and sometimes it is a copy-paste approach. The Arab regimes that are facing this strategic threat are the same slogans. They are using the same slogans, and the justifications are almost the same. So today we see a kind of globalizing this confrontation. And this brings me back to the question that I asked in the beginning, which is why and who is pushing towards that? Is it an ideological project? Is it a capitalist project, a economic project? What kind of projects are we talking about here? I hope from the reformists in the UAE to establish think tanks, study centers, to think about these issues and to make research about these issues. I said that one of the problems of the reformists in Iraq and UAE and even some of the Islamists, they know very little about the Islamic movement in UAE and their achievements. So this is my final remark, that I hope in the coming period to see research centers that will do research about that, to present them in different languages, because the Emirati issue is not local anymore. It is an international affair and everybody is interested in. But because the economic aspect always overcomes the or comes above the value aspect, everyone is looking at the economics only. That's it from me. Thank you very much. Thank you, Dr. Anas, and I would like to thank all the participants, Mr. Humaid Alnuaimi, Mr. Ahmed Alshaiba Alnuaimi, Mr. Hamza Alshaiba, and Dr. Walaa. They are all in London, and Dr. Walaa in the USA, Mr. Ahmed Maulana in Istanbul, and Mr. Altikriti in London as well. Thank you very much for your for these presentations. The next symposium or the session will be at 3:30 in Istanbul time, 12:30 GMT time. It will be the final one in this series. It will be about Saudi Arabia. We hope that you will tune in with us. Thank you very much, and peace be upon you.